If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you. The casual words hung in the still air of the lobby, sharp and sudden like broken glass. Sloane Wilder didn't even look up from her phone as she uttered them, a taunt thrown into the void. She thought she was alone, but she was wrong. The Andar Records lobby gleamed breathtakingly. Light stretched across the marble floor in crisp gold and white streaks. Sloane's heels, decisive and authoritative, cut through the silence. She was the picture of a self-made CEO, with her impeccable navy suit, neat blonde hair, and a wristwatch that served as a constant reminder of her status. Initially, Sloane didn't notice the janitor. His presence was almost invisible, just part of the scenery. He was hunched over the royal blue grand piano that stood at the center of the lobby. It was a treasure imported from Germany, antique and untouched since the company acquired it at auction. To everyone, it resembled a sculpture more than an instrument, a silent symbol of wealth and culture. He gently wiped the intricately carved legs as if they were sacred relics. His movements were slow, deliberate, a stark contrast to the hurried, ruthless world around him. This reverence caught Sloane's attention. She paused her scrolling for a moment, and then, without warning, the offhand remark spilled from her lips. A joke, a display of power, a reminder of her place in a world where everything and everyone could be valued. The man stopped. His hand, holding a soft cloth, froze mid-air. The silence deepened, heavier than before. Sloane could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of her own heart. When he looked up, his grey-blue eyes met hers. They were tired yet remarkably calm. There was no surprise, no anger, no inferiority. He just blinked, a slow, almost indifferent gesture. Then he returned to his cloth, completing the motion on the glossy lid, as if dusting away her words. Sloane stood there for a moment longer, feeling oddly unsettled. His indifference was more unsettling than an angry retort. It was as if she had thrown a stone into a bottomless chasm and heard no echo. She cleared her throat, feeling the need to regain control, but no words came out. Sloane turned away, her steps no longer as steady as before. A discordant note had just sounded in the tightly controlled symphony of her life. The next morning, the discordant note still echoed. Amidst tense board meetings, million-dollar contract negotiations, and a media firestorm, the image of the cleaner's hands on the piano haunted her. It was not a physical attraction, but a vague recognition, a silent question. In the boardroom, she looked at the familiar faces, men in expensive suits, who spoke of art in the language of numbers. She suddenly realized she was one of them. She had learned to turn melodies into assets and emotions into commodities. "Sloane, are you with us?" The vice president's voice pulled her back to reality. "Fourth quarter revenue projections." "I am," she replied, her voice as cool as ever. But in her mind, the image of those moss-colored eyes still lingered. As soon as the meeting ended, she called her assistant, Sarah, a terrifyingly efficient young woman. Sarah, who is the night cleaner in the main lobby. A moment of silence on the other end was enough to show how unusual the question was. "Let me see. His name is Malcolm Hayes. He's been here for almost 5 years, and his record is spotless. A very quiet man, no trouble at all. Does he have any background before he worked here?" "The record only shows general labor jobs. Nothing remarkable, ma'am. Would you like me to dig deeper?" "No," Sloane said sharply. Perhaps too sharply. "That will be all." She hung up. Malcolm Hayes. The name felt uncomfortably familiar, like a tune she had heard in a long-forgotten dream. That evening, she deliberately stayed late. The building slowly sank into silence, and the lit offices went dark one by one. She stepped out of the elevator, not in heels, but in soft flats. She was not wearing her power suit, but a gray cashmere sweater that made her look smaller and more vulnerable. He was there again, this time polishing the piano's brass pedals. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing thin arms with pronounced veins. Sloane stood nearby, in the shadow of a marble column. She did not know what to say. Another apology felt redundant. Silence was probably best, but the silence between them now held a different weight. "I said something foolish yesterday," she finally said, her voice softer than she intended. "About Chopin." He looked up, those calm eyes meeting hers. He did not say anything, just waited in silence. "I was arrogant," she admitted, feeling her face grow warm. "I apologize." The pause was so long she thought he would not respond. Then his voice came, low and measured. like a cello in an empty room. I have heard worse. Sloane offered a wry smile. I am sure you have. I used to play a long time ago, too. She said it like a confession. He nodded, returning to his work, but she knew he was listening. Did you used to study music? She asked hesitantly, the question that had been on her mind all day. He stopped, putting the cloth down. He looked at the piano with a pained affection, then turned to her. It was a look that saw through her, a look that was not judgmental, but saw everything, even the little girl who had once loved music before she learned to use it as a weapon. Chopin is not meant to be performed, he said. It is meant to be prayed. The words resonated deep inside her, in a place that had been locked away for a long time. She did not know what to say. To her, Chopin had always meant technique, tension, applause, her father's stern nod, her mother's silence. It was perfection as punishment. She had never considered it a prayer. Sloane stood there a moment longer, mumbled a farewell, and turned away. That night, in her luxurious but cold penthouse, she entered her music room for the first time in years. The room was pristine, not a speck of dust. Her Steinway piano stood there like a gleaming coffin. She lifted the heavy lid, the keys cool beneath her fingertips. She placed one finger on middle C and pressed down. The sound was brittle, too bright, too sharp. It lacked warmth, it lacked a soul. She recoiled as if burned. In her reflection on the piano's polished lid, she did not see a powerful CEO. She saw a lonely woman, trapped in the very fortress she had built for herself. A buried memory suddenly rushed back. She was 11 years old, playing Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu at a prestigious piano competition. Everything was perfect until a single note went astray. No one in the audience noticed, but her father did. After the performance, he did not scold her, but looked at her with cold disappointment and said, "Perfection has no room for mistakes, Sloane. You either get it right, or you do not do it at all." That night, the little girl who loved music died. A soldier was born, and that soldier won every battle except the one against the silence in her own soul. Sloane's curiosity had now become a silent obsession. By day, she was the ice queen of Andar Records, but by night, in her office, she became a detective. Malcolm Hayes, pianist. This time, she dug deeper, going beyond the usual search results. She found old classical music forums, archives of long-forgotten competitions, and then she found a blurry scan of a program from the 2005 International Montreal Piano Festival. His name was on the list of finalists. Malcolm Hayes, United States, age 22. He was a rising young talent, praised for his extraordinary emotional depth. After that, nothing. He vanished. There were no articles, no announcements of his withdrawal. It was as if he had walked off the stage and simply disappeared into thin air. That evening, she could not wait. She found him in the lobby, a reliable constant. "Montreal," she said flatly, without a greeting, her voice carrying the weight of her discovery. "You were a finalist." He was polishing a glass window, her reflection appearing beside his. He stopped, slowly putting down the cloth. He did not seem surprised that she knew. His eyes held only a distant sadness. "You were supposed to be someone," she continued, realizing the irony in her words. She, who had become someone, felt empty. He, who was no one, carried a depth she could not comprehend. He remained silent. His silence was a wall, but this time she was determined to climb over it. Sloane moved closer, her voice softening, no longer an accusation but a question filled with genuine concern. "What happened, Malcolm?" A long silence. He turned his back to the cold glass, leaning against it as if needing support. "My wife's name was Rachel," he said, his voice even, as if telling someone else's story. Sloane swallowed hard. This was a door she had not expected. She was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The week before my Carnegie Hall audition. It was the biggest opportunity of my life. The words fell like slow drops of rain on cold pavement. Sloane could imagine it. The waiting stage lights, and another, darker shadow looming. I did not go. She told me to go, begged me to go, said the music was who I was, but I couldn't. How could I play Rachmaninoff while my world was falling apart? She passed away 9 months later, he continued, his eyes gazing out at the city's nightscape. I was there with her. After she was gone, the music, it became too loud. Every key held a memory, every melody was a ghost. So I sold my piano and took whatever job I could get, a job that did not require me to feel, just to work. Finally, he looked at her, not with sadness, but with a chilling stillness, as if the storm had long passed and only a desolate landscape remained. The only stage I wanted to be on was the one beside her hospital bed, he said. And I missed that final performance. I couldn't save her. Sloane's heart tightened. She took a deep breath. You did not give up, she said, her voice more certain than she thought possible. You loved. You chose love over a career. That is not a failure. He blinked slowly, as if no one had ever framed it that way. Most people call it a failure, he said softly. I call it sacred, she replied, and in that moment, she believed it more than any prophet report. The Andar Records Winter Gala was held at the Lyra Theatre. The stage glowed under amber lights, adorned with white roses, and a string quartet hired more for their looks than their musical ability. Champagne flutes sparkled like promises. Laughter echoed, polite and practiced, yet hollow. Sloane Wilder stood on the mezzanine balcony, observing the room like an outsider. She wore a black gown that was as shimmering as silk but as sharp as armor. Tonight, however, she did not feel strong. Ever since hearing the pain in Malcolm's voice, everything around her had felt out of tune. Then a senior board member took the stage. Our special artist tonight had an unfortunate skiing accident. But fear not, he chuckled. We have an even better replacement. He turned to the audience and said 6 words that made Sloane's stomach lurch. Sloane Wilder will be playing for us. Laughter and applause erupted, the kind you give to someone when you assume they have already agreed. She stared at him, her eyes wide. He winked. People turned. Someone handed her a drink. No. A moment later, she was backstage, seated before a grand piano, thousands of eyes waiting. The lights were warm. The silence was suffocating. She placed her hands on the keys. It had been years since she had played seriously in public. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the old muscle memory, the ancient discipline that had once made her father proud. Her fingers began the opening of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. The first 3 notes. Something broke. A memory came rushing back like a tidal wave. An 11-year-old recital. She had hit a single wrong note, and her father's whisper afterward, "Perfection has no room for mistakes, Sloane. You either get it right, or you do not do it at all." That night, the little girl who loved music died, and now, 2 decades later, her adult hands were shaking. She hit a wrong chord. Then another. Silence. A deafening, shameful silence. She stood up, mumbled a generic apology, and walked off the stage. The polite applause behind her sounded like dry leaves rustling in a dead garden. She ran down the hall, her heels clicking too loudly on the concrete. She wanted to scream or cry or disappear. Then she heard the piano, not from the stage, but from down a service corridor. She followed it, not sure if it was real. In a small room, under a dim maintenance light, was Malcolm. He was seated at an old upright piano. He was playing her piece, but not the version she had just attempted. His was slower, softer, more reverent, as if he were holding someone close. He did not look up when she entered, nor did he stop. He just played, his eyes closed. Not for performance, not for redemption, but simply to play. When he finished, he sat in silence for a beat, then turned to her. She said nothing. "You know," he said quietly, "the first time I played this piece, my wife cried." She moved closer. He gestured for her to sit on the bench beside him. "You were frozen," he said, "up there." "I forgot," she whispered. "No. You remembered," he corrected. "You remembered all the pain." She blinked, startled. He reached over, gently tapped a single note on the piano, and then placed her hand on the next one. "Try again," he said. Her hands trembled. "I cannot." He waited, without pressure. Finally, she played a note, then another, and then she stopped. He filled the space with the 3rd note. Like that, they pieced together a fragile melody. At one point, she looked down at her hands and whispered, "My left hand locks up when I get scared." He nodded. "So does your heart." They continued to play, not for anyone else, but just for themselves. When they finished, there was no applause. None was needed, because what they had just created was not a performance, but a heartfelt prayer. That night, after the gala ended and the glitter was swept away, Sloane's name card was found on an empty table. On the back, she had scribbled 5 musical notes, the opening of a melody. There were no words or instructions, just the music. He had been a finalist, then he disappeared, not because of a scandal or any other reason, but simply because he walked away. A few days after the disastrous gala, Sloane drove to Malcolm's neighborhood, a modest area of old apartment buildings. She stood in front of his apartment door, her heart pounding, unsure of what she was even looking for. She knocked. He opened the door, and once again, he was not surprised. As if he had been expecting her, he quietly stepped aside to let her in. The apartment was small but cozy, smelling faintly of cinnamon, old books, and polished wood. In the middle of the room, under the soft light from the window, was his piano. It was the one he had sold years ago. "I bought it back," he said, guessing the question in her eyes. "A few years ago, but I do not play it. Just to look at it." On top of the piano was a single picture frame. The woman in the photo had deep brown eyes and a radiant smile. It was Rachel. "She taught me how to listen to the silence," Malcolm said softly. He pulled an old yellowed music notebook from a drawer and handed it to Sloane. "I was writing this for her before she passed." Sloane opened it. It was a carefully handwritten sonata, full of passion. The melody was fierce and then gentle, but it stopped abruptly in the middle of the third movement. After a dramatic passage were pages of blank paper. "This piece," she whispered, her fingers tracing the final notes. "Why does it stop here?" He looked at the page and then at her, his eyes an ocean of unspoken sorrows. "That was the day she died," he said quietly. "The melody just stopped. I did not know how to say goodbye." Sloane was silent. She sat down on the piano bench and placed the notebook on the music stand. Her fingers traced the pencil marks, the gentle curves that ended in silence. He did not stop playing. There was just no more room for the grief. She looked at him. "Maybe some pieces are not meant to have an ending," she said. "They can be forever unfinished. Because love does not end, it just finds a new path." That night, after leaving his apartment, Sloane did not go home. She drove back to the Andar Records building, where the lobby was empty and silent as a cathedral. She sat before the royal blue grand piano she had once scorned. Malcolm's music notebook was open in front of her. Her hands trembled, hovering over the keys. What if silence was safer than trying again? She closed her eyes and began to play his sonata, with all of her heart and all of her pain. When she reached the unfinished ending, she did not stop. Taking a deep breath, from somewhere deep inside, a new melody emerged. She added a chord, soft and suspended, a question rather than an answer. It did not say goodbye. It said, "I am still here." When she looked up, Malcolm was standing in the doorway. He had been there, listening, for who knows how long. He did not say anything. He just walked over and sat down beside her. His left hand slid beneath hers, filling in the gaps, and together they played. Not his sonata, not Chopin's nocturne. They improvised, creating something new, a wordless dialogue where his pain met her regret, and from it, a fragile, honest beauty was born. Rumors about the cold CEO and the silent cleaner began to spread like a smoldering fire throughout Andar Records. There were stolen glances and whispers behind hands. The security camera in the lobby, which usually only recorded lifeless movements, had now captured the moment they played music together late at night. Caldwell, Sloane's rival, did not miss the opportunity. He called an emergency board meeting, using the CEO's unprofessional behavior and poor judgment that could damage the company's image as his leverage. Sloane walked into the meeting, where the air was cold and hostile. 12 faces, mostly men, stared at her like a pack of wolves. Caldwell began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Sloane, we are concerned. There are videos of you and a low-level employee late at night. This is not only a blatant violation of protocol, but also a catastrophic lapse in judgment that could ruin Andar Records' reputation." He paused, waiting for an excuse, a denial. Sloane looked at each of them. She no longer felt fear, only pity for men trapped in expensive suits, bound by the very rules they had created. She thought of Malcolm, his music, and the raw, painful truth of his story. She stood up, her posture straight and calm. "You are right, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "I was with Malcolm Hayes. We played music. And if you want the truth, Here it is. I love him. A stunned silence fell over the room. Jaws dropped, and Caldwell froze, his face pale. Sloane continued, her tone no longer that of a ruthless CEO but of a truthful woman. But I am not here to apologize. You talk about image, about reputation. I, on the other hand, have spent my whole life building a perfect facade, a flawless reputation. I turned myself into a machine, a living profit chart, and I was empty. She placed her hands on the table and looked directly at Caldwell. Because of Malcolm, I remembered that music is not about numbers. It is about breath. It is about truth. And I cannot continue to run a company that cares only about the packaging and forgets the content within. She took a deep, liberating breath. Therefore, I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately. But let us be clear, I am not resigning out of shame. I am resigning because I am no longer afraid. She turned and walked out of the meeting, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She did not look back. For the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of relief, as if she had just shed a heavy armor she had worn for far too long. A few weeks later, a simple poster appeared in cafes, libraries, and community centers across the city. There was no Andar Records logo, no flashy promotions, just the words, Malcolm Hayes, piano, one night only, Lincoln Chapel, free admission, come and listen. Lincoln Chapel was no Carnegie Hall. It was a small, ancient chapel with wooden pews and stained glass windows, known for its rustic, warm acoustics. Sloane was behind the entire event. She used her savings, convincing Malcolm that the world needed to hear his story, not the critics, but ordinary people. That night, the chapel was packed, not with faces from high society or the music industry, but with teachers, nurses, students, the old, the young, people with their own stories and their own hurts, drawn in by the poster's sincerity. When Malcolm walked onto the stage, he was not in a suit. He was simply wearing a shirt and slacks. He sat down at the piano, looked at the audience, and smiled, a smile no longer etched with weariness. He said nothing. He began to play. First came the Chopin Nocturne, but it was not a technical performance. It was a gentle whisper. Then he played his unfinished sonata, the story of love and loss. But this time, when he reached the ending, he did not stop. He kept playing, performing the conclusion that he and Sloane had created together, a new chapter of acceptance and hope. His music filled the chapel. It spoke of pain, of silence, of love that never dies. It was not a performance, it was a collective healing. Tears silently streamed down the faces of many in the audience. They were not crying for Malcolm, they were crying for themselves, for their own losses and their own unfinished melodies. Finally, he stopped, looked directly at the audience, and said, his voice warm and steady, "Years ago, I lost the light of my life, my dear wife, Rachel, and I thought the music had died with her." He paused, taking a breath. But I was wrong. The music never dies, it just waits. And then, someone came along and reminded me how to breathe again. Someone gave me the strength to face the silence. He looked down at the front row, where Sloane was sitting, her eyes glistening. "This last piece, I have never played for anyone. I wrote it over the past few weeks. It is not for the past, it is for the present and the future. I dedicate this piece to Sloane, who has become my strength." He began to play. It was a new melody, unlike anything that had come before. It did not carry the sadness of loss, but the warmth of a new dawn. It was clear, strong, and full of hope. It was the sound of two souls who had found each other, of a symphony finally completed. When the last note faded into silence, there was no immediate thunderous applause, just a moment of reverent quiet. Then one person stood and clapped, then another, and soon the entire chapel was on its feet, the applause ringing out, not for perfection, but for truth. Malcolm stood and bowed. He did not look at the crowd, he looked only at Sloane, and in their eyes, without words, was a promise, a melody that would echo on.